Hello again. I'm back today to talk a little bit more about this quilt and in particular how I'm going to quilt this thing. I talked about quilting last time a little bit, but today I'm going to talk about quilting a little bit more in detail. Because obviously, before you can start quilting, you have to decide how you're going to quilt. What kind of pattern you want to use. Now, there are a few different options here. The first option I thought about was some kind of all-over quilting. All-over quilting means that you choose a pattern of some sort and you use the same pattern all over the quilt. It could be stripes, it could be a grid, it could be some sort of squiggly lines that you use all over the quilt. So the advantage with all over quilting is that it's quite easy, it's quite simple. You decide which pattern you're going to use and then you use it all over without, thinking about the different motifs or blocks you have in your quilt. Now with this quilt, there is a disadvantage to that because it's quite busy already, and if I use an all-over pattern, this quilt would become even more busy. And I don't think I want that. I would have to use a colorless thread if I wanted to stitch an all-over pattern. Because if I use the dark thread, which sort of disappears into the background, the stars would also disappear into the background, because the dark thread would sort of hide the stars. Now if I chose a lighter thread, something that is matching the stars, then the stars would sort of flow out into the background. And the shapes or the edges of the stars would sort of disappear. It would become a bit fuzzy. So I don't want that. I want my stars to pop. So that's why I had to think of something else. Now the next option is echo quilting. Echo quilting means that you look at your shapes, like the stars, and then you follow the outline and you go round it and then you keep going round it, so it's like rings on the water. It sort of travels outwards. Now that would be a great option, apart from the fact that these stars are quite tightly packed, so it would work only in this big black squares. In the other areas they're too small to really make an impact, so it's not practical. So I had to think of the next option. Now the next option is stitch in the ditch. Stitch in the ditch means that you quilt closely along the edges where two different fabrics meet. So in this case I would follow and stitch in the seam between the stars and the background. The disadvantage to stitch in the ditch in this case is that when I started piecing this quilt, I decided to press the seam allowances open. The reason I did this was that I noticed that there are, for example, in these places, there are 4 narrow points that meet. So you have to think about where you press the seam allowances, to which side. And I thought, well, I'm not a very, let's say, experienced quilter, patchwork. I have quilted a lot, but I usually work with sort of whole cloth quilting. So I don't usually work with patchwork. So that's why I thought, no, I'm going to press the seam allowance open. Now what that means that if I want to stitch in the ditch, I will stitch between the fabric pieces, because the fabric pieces are apart and the seam allowances are apart. So there's this space between the fabric pieces which is held together by threads. Now if you stitch on top of these threads, there is a risk that you will weaken the seams and that you will split the threads, which will further weaken the seams, or even make the seams sort of unravel in certain places. So you have to be a little bit careful. But I decided I'm going to stitch in the ditch nevertheless, because there are some things here that reduce the risk. First of all, I'm going to free motion quilt this work, and since they are quite straight lines, it's very difficult to stitch a perfectly straight line when you're doing it freehand. So there will be little wobbles everywhere, and those little wobbles will actually anchor the fabric to the batting and the lining fabric. Also, in the smaller stars, the wonky stars, where I used foundation paper piecing, the seams are pressed, all of them are pressed to the side. So in that case, the fabric pieces will be anchored. So these will be good anchor points, which will reduce the tension and stress on the quilted or on the stitching around these bigger stars. Another reason I chose to stitch in the ditch is also because, as I mentioned, the stars are quite tightly packed, and if I chose, for example, echo quilting, I would soon run over the tips of neighboring stars, and I want to avoid that. Now the next thing to consider after you have decided how you're going to quilt is what kind of thread you are going to use. I decided I'm going to use a plain dark or plain black thread to stitch around the stars. This is a thread which will disappear into the background, so I will enhance the stars that will pop out. I did think about the possibility of using some sort of glitzy or fun thread, something glittering, because these are stars obviously, so it would be fun with a little bit of glimmer. But since I've chosen stitch in the ditch, I decided that I'm going to skip that idea. Well, first of all, because a glitzy thread is not as strong as other types of thread, so it would weaken the seams, but perhaps even more so because the glittery thread would disappear into the ditch, so I felt that perhaps it's a waste of good thread. It could look fun, because if you saw my earlier video, I talked about how I like this effect when things pop out and disappear, that there's a movement. And if the glittery thread sort of went down into the ditch and popped up again in different places, it could look fun. But still I decided no, I'm not going to do that, because the risk is that if my stitch line is wobbly and if the thread is sort of popping up and disappearing, it could sort of enhance the seams or stitches in a way that I don't want. However, since I had this idea about something glittery or glitzy and fun and glittering in this star cushion cover, I couldn't really let go of the idea. So I thought, well, perhaps I should use this thread here. I don't know if it shows up but this is a black thread with a bit of glitter in it, and I think I'm going to use this one as a decorative element in the middle of at least these bigger stars. So I'm thinking that I could quilt a square or a circle in this glittery thread, which would add a little bit of a sort of a fun detail. It would soften the look of these quite sort of geometric and rigid stars, and sort of add an extra element, an extra detail. For me, quilting isn't just something you do at the end when you've done all the piecing and you need to find a way to join the quilt top and the batting and the backing fabric. So for me, quilting is a way of adding something extra, or a chance of adding something extra, of enhancing a design or telling a sort of side story. So that's why I think I'm going to add these little glitzy details as an extra fun detail, just to add an extra dimension. So that's my plan at the moment. Next I need to find some batting and a backing fabric and start quilting. So I'll be back later with a new report. Bye for now!